I'm going to pause that one. Keep that one in mind. Clearly, that is not the way that we are used to hearing it, but an interesting tradition nonetheless. And I'm going to play what I sort of feel like is the most Ashkenazi that you could find. Gary will do it. Wait for it. So we sort of get the point. So before we start and really get into this text, the text is all about vows and annulment of vows. And we're going to sort of spend a little bit of time this morning talking about what our tradition teaches us about vows and why this piece of liturgy is perhaps has been taken in and out of our tradition over the years. But I'm curious, either from those melodies, from the one that you recognize to the one that is not as recognizable, or the words or the setting. I'm just curious what it invokes, like just as a sort of jumping off point into the text, what the Kol Nidre itself invokes for you in terms of anything. I mean, in terms of the holiday season, like what it makes you think of, what it makes you feel or remember. Any thoughts? Don't go all at once. Catherine.
Oh, I would say dread. And this is for the Ashkenazi one. And then also it just really sets a tone of, it's time to get serious now.
Mm-hmm. Like the time has come. Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, Sandy, just make sure. Yeah.
Um, what for me is always the most compelling part is being together, being with the community in a room, holding the Torah, which I have the privilege of doing, and just being there together. I don't know, I'm not being very articulate, but.
Okay. But that prayer specifically is kind of like probably the most attended service of the whole year, right? So you have a fairly packed room. We have a tradition at Beth Sholom, and I'm sure I know it happens elsewhere, where presidents of the congregation hold the Torahs, which you've been involved in. So there's this real sense of community around Kol Nidre. Yeah, I get that. Thank you. Anybody else? So, yeah, Dara. I think you're muted.
Okay, there I go. Yeah, I appreciate what you just said about community and everyone being together around the Torah, but I would just say that the sound of that melody, the Ashkenazi melody, for me evokes this kind of lonely, it's kind of like, now it's all up to you on your own. You know, like in the middle of that room with all the people packed together, everybody there, you know, for that purpose, it feels like sort of a solitary thing.
Yeah, so even though it's perhaps like the biggest packed service, it's actually a feeling of your own work that you have to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, Ernie.
I think you can't separate the community and the music. It's a whole package, and I think all of it has an emotional and intellectual appeal if you grew up with it. I can understand some people who were not brought up that way, but if you grew up with it, it's the whole package. Sure, the melody is wonderful, and we've had wonderful cantors, but it is also being with other people. So that I think I take the whole thing together.
Yeah, thank you, Ernie. Gary.
I'm thinking of it strictly musically and not what it evokes from knowing it. And the part that they both share is that the words are not a note or a phrase. I mean, each word kind of is a run. So it soars. It takes us from a groundedness upward by every single one of those words, you know, is a run in the music. Yeah.
Yeah, it's yes, every one of those words has its own piece in the music and has its own meaning, and we'll see that it's not really a prayer. It's more, as it says in the Machzor, it's a legal formula. It's a way, it's an annulment of vows, and we're going to sort of talk about what that means. Ellen, and then Sandy, and I think we'll move into the text.
It's always a very stirring piece of music to me. It goes straight to my heart and my soul. And I think part of it, there is a joy in it to me in relishing that I am Jewish and I am there in the midst of a community of my fellow Jews. And at this age now, there is always an amazement that we are here again. How could we so quickly be here again? I know what the prayer says, but I cannot fathom Yom Kippur without Kol Nidre.
Yeah, thank you. Sandy.
And I think this alludes to what you said, Rabbi, is that although I agree with everything that's been said, the prayer itself has taken on so much more than it really is when you read it. There's nothing soaring about this prayer. There's nothing that's so inspirational. And even though it's important, I'm sure you'll talk about much meaning about canceling vows. It's so much bigger than, anyway.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's get into a little bit of text about what vows actually are. So here's first just sort of a definitions about, oh, I'm looking at my own shared screen and I haven't shared it with you yet. Hold on for a second. There we go. Make it even bigger, let's see. How's that? Everybody okay? Okay. So here's what our tradition says about vows. The Hebrew word neder, which we're going to see a lot, like nidre, kol nidre, neder is a vow, is used in the Bible for a promise made to God to perform some sort of a deed, as well as for a prohibition which a person imposes upon himself, him or herself, to abstain from something which is otherwise permitted. The former is contrasted in the Mishnah with a nedava, which we're not going to get so much into the nedava, which is a free will offering, while the latter is differentiated from the shvu'ah, which is in the Kol Nidre prayer, the shvu'ah, which is the oath. The distinction between these two appears to be largely technical, but it has far-reaching consequences in the practical sphere. In the vow, the person prohibits the thing to him or herself by declaring, I take upon myself. In the oath, he prohibits himself to the thing by saying, I swear to do this or not to do this. It is with the second category of vow that the Talmud largely concerns itself and to which this entry is confirmed. So we're going to be mostly talking about neder or nidarim, but you'll see in the Kol Nidre prayer that it also talks about shvu'at, right? Shvu'ot, and these oaths. And so there's a small distinction between the two of those things. And like I said, we're mostly going to be talking about what it is a vow. So here's the main source of what a vow is in the Torah. It comes from Numbers chapter 30, verse 3. Ish ki yidor neder. So for those of you who are Hebrew speakers, you'll notice that yidor and neder share the same root. So essentially it says, if a person vows a vow, I have two translations here, Sefaria and also Mechon Mamre. If any of you, Sefaria often gives us a more, I don't know if you want to say understandable translation. It kind of makes it more into English. And Mechon Mamre very much takes it word for word into Hebrew. So, you wouldn't say if a person voweth a vow, but that's kind of how they do a nice job of really translating it literally. So if a person makes a vow to God or takes an oath imposing an obligation on himself, he shall not break his pledge. He must carry out all that has crossed his lips. So here we see, and then I'll just read the Mechon Mamre. When a man voweth a vow unto God or sweareth an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeded out of his mouth. So we have this very strong sense in the Torah that if one makes a vow, one must stick to it, right? It's a sin, and it is a big problem in the Torah, and also what you'll see later in the Talmud, that if you make a vow and you do not keep it, it's considered to be a sin. It also says, right, he must carry out all that has crossed his lips. So the idea here, now it doesn't seem to be so strong in this one verse, but the idea is that you have to watch what you say, right? So that if you're going to make a promise, if you're going to make a vow, it is your responsibility to carry it out. Now Rashi explains this a little bit. This is when one says, behold, I take upon myself an obligation which is sacred to me as an offering, that I will not eat or that I will not do such and such a thing. So Rashi is saying specifically that that a vow has to do with something that you're saying you're not going to do. One might think that if he swears that he will eat the flesh of an animal which has not been slaughtered properly according to the rite, that I may apply it to this text, i.e., if you say that you're going to eat something that's not kosher, right, that you have to keep it, he shall do, and then there's a verse, to forbid himself something which is permissible to him and not to make permissible that which is forbidden to him. So you can't essentially you can't make a promise to something that you're not actually supposed to do. It doesn't count, but rather it's the things that are part of our law. Yes, Sandy. Is your hand up? No. Yeah. Sandy Goldstein, is your hand up? Okay.
No, never was.
Okay.
That was before.
Okay, Ernie.
I missed what exactly is the difference between a vow and an oath.
Yeah, let's go back up. So
I don't get it.
So okay, I'm gonna go even farther down. A vow, in the vow, a person prohibits a thing from declare. So a vow is something that you're taking on, that you're taking on for yourself, whereas an oath is swearing not to do something. Does that make sense? So Rashi is actually saying a little bit different. That if we go back to this original translation, the vow, it's very, very minor. It's very, very minor. But what I guess what I'm saying is that when the Talmud talks about these different categories of things, it's really focused on the vow itself. So a vow is generally, I'm gonna scroll down. I'm gonna scroll down so that we can get another definition that might help us. Hold on for a second. Here we go. What is the difference between a vow and an oath? The difference between an oath and a vow is somewhat technical. Vows refer to an object. A person prohibits something to themselves, right? So you say, I vow not to do X, Y, and Z. The vow refers to a thing. An oath refers to a person. A person swears an oath to perform an action or swear something that is true. So an oath might be the way that you act towards another person. I vow not to, I don't know, give any example. Whereas an oath whereas a vow is something that is specific, like I vow not to eat meat for a year or something like that, right? It's more about a thing. Is that helpful? Sort of. Yeah, I think it's not super clear, right? And the words, similar to like we've studied the 13 midot, right? Where you look, every single word is like, they're very, very similar. And you might wonder, well, what's the difference between this and this? And it's hard really to say, only to say that when we talk about it in the text, when we talk about what a vow is, and I'll just warn you, this is not going to get any easier. It's not the most clear, but the Talmud and the Torah are mostly concerned with vows. I'll put it that way, and hopefully we can get something out of it.
Okay.
Where were we? We're in the Rashi. So Rashi is saying, right, one might think that if he swears that he will eat the flesh of an animal which has not been slaughtered properly, i.e. if he swears that he will eat a non-kosher animal, that you might be able to apply this text. And Rashi is saying no, right? It has to be something that is permissible. You have to make a vow under something that our tradition accepts, essentially. And then the Or HaChaim is commenting on the redundancy of the word, this idea that it says Yidor Neder, right? The redundancy of vowing a vow. And he is saying an ordinary vow involves an undertaking to go to a certain place or to perform a certain task. The addition of the word Adonai here means that different rules apply when the vow is not of a secular nature, but relates to one's conduct vis-a-vis God. The addition of this word, therefore, means that the word neder has not been repeated at all, but that one applies to secular vows and one applies to religious vows. So we're getting like all kinds of definitions, right? For what's a vow, what's an oath. There are actually certain different kinds of vows. This was really not to confuse you, more so to give you sort of a breadth of understanding about what we're talking about. Perhaps it was too wide. Perhaps it's like giving us too many options. Are there any questions up until now? I'm sure there are a million questions, but anything specific that I can answer? I can try to answer. Okay, so we'll keep going. So here, we'll just read this one more time. What is the difference between a vow and an oath? The difference between an oath and a vow is somewhat technical. Vows refer to an object, and an oath pertains to a person. I don't know, can anybody think of an example of that? A vow versus an oath, Todd?
Well, I thought, for example, in the Haftarah yesterday, right? So it was Hannah, right? She took a vow, right, to dedicate her child to God, right? Whereas I thought an oath is more like what we understand today, to swear, to tell the truth in court. And I thought before the Sanhedrin, didn't people have to take an oath You know, I saw, you know, the new moon, you know, in that testimony. I thought they took an oath to say that.
Yeah, it's an interesting distinction. It doesn't exactly fit in our translation here, but definitely, yes, people took oaths to having seen, like, in order to say, like, the cycle of Shabbat, that they saw you're referring to, what did you say, the example that you used, that they saw the moon?
Rosh Chodesh.
Rosh
Yeah.
Chodesh, exactly, right. So that would be more of an oath, though here it says the oath pertains to a person, so it's like not exactly clear. Yeah, thank you. Let's see, someone chatted here. Oh, you put it in the chat. Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, it's a little bit of a complicated subject. So thank you for your question. Okay, here's the next text in the Torah. Ki tidor neder. So again, we have this, if you vow a vow, right? The tidor is also a derivation of the word neder. When you make a vow to Adonai your God, do not put off in fulfilling it. For Adonai your God will require it of you, and you will have incurred guilt. Whereas you incur no guilt if you refrain from vowing. You must fulfill what has crossed your lips and perform what you have voluntarily vowed to Adonai your God, having made the promise with your own mouth. Okay, so in our first piece of text, we have this idea that if we make a vow, if we make a promise to God or a person, I suppose, depending on the way that we think about what a vow actually is, if you vow something, you have to follow through with it. You have to carry out the thing that you said. And now we have an added piece of that in Deuteronomy where it says, not only do you have to fulfill it, but don't delay. You have to do it right away. And Rashi helps us to understand that you should not put off fulfilling it, meaning you have no more than the next 3 pilgrimage festivals to fulfill it. So there's an actual amount of time that you have to fulfill the vow that you made. Thoughts? So now we have two ways of understanding the vow. First of all, we have to keep our promise. And second of all, we can't delay in making our promise. So we're going to see eventually we're going to get to Kol Nidre. We're going to see how this whole thing is kind of, well, we'll get there. Any thoughts? Dara?
Well, it's almost as if there are some disincentives to making a vow. If you make a vow and you don't fulfill it right away, you will incur guilt. You will incur no guilt if you refrain from vowing. So it's almost like saying, well, it's good if you want to do whatever thing, but don't make a vow about it, because then you have to do it right away. And if you don't, or you can't, then it's not going to be good for you.
Right. So the question, and we'll come back to it, is that you're posing, is it better to, well, we know, is it better to not make the vow at all? And the answer that I think our tradition would give us is yes. Best not to make the vow if you don't think you can live up to it, than to make the vow and not be able to stand by it. And so the question is, well, should we bother making vows at all? Maybe best not to get into that business. Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially in the time of COVID, it makes it really clear, like you're saying at some point in the future, I'm going to do this thing, but like everything is so uncertain. And even not in the time of COVID, there's a way you're saying, I think I'm in control of life. And really, you really never are that much in control.
Right.
Hopefully that's not too grim a view of it, but
Yeah, no, thank you. Right. So best not to make the vow, because you don't actually know what the cards that you've been handed. You don't know what the future holds. And so maybe it's better not to make the vow at all. Marcia, you're muted.
The vow I think about is a marriage vow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a promise. It's a promise to be filled not just at that moment, but for over time.
Yeah. It's a great point.
And the consequences of breaking your vow are actually quite severe. And so it's something that one plans for and takes quite seriously. You don't make a marriage oath.
Yeah, so there's a distinction there, I think, between maybe between vow and oath, but really, you know, interesting point that you made, because in Judaism, we don't really have vows when it comes to the wedding. We have a ketubah, right? And we have the sort of ring exchange, which has been, you know, over the centuries, sort of, you now can, in an egalitarian or conservative, more liberal wedding, you might exchange in both directions, that the bride and the groom, or the, you know, partners exchange in both directions, not just that that the husband gives the wife a ring. But in any case, there aren't really vows having to do with the wedding. And perhaps there's reason for that, right? Because, well, whatever you might, I mean, that you might not want to make that sort of a vow for fear of what the future holds. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Yeah, Ernie.
The Rashi 3 pilgrimages, that's Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. It's about 6 months, is it?
Yeah.
Just to give it a time point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, you get basically, it's a little more than 6 months. Shavuot is more like June, and we're talking about, I mean, I guess if we're talking about Rosh Hashanah, then it's probably a little bit more than that. If you're talking about making a vow at Sukkot, yeah, you're about 6 months. But you're exactly, I mean, essentially what I think it's saying is you have a cycle of a year almost, because it's almost a year cycle with all three of those holidays, which is interesting because in the Kol Nidre text, we talked specifically about, you know, Yom Kippur to Yom Kippur being the sort of bookend of when vows can be annulled. So far in the Torah, we haven't gotten this idea of annulment of vows, right? So you can make a vow and you're stuck with it, right? If you make a vow, you have to carry it out, and you have to carry it out in a certain amount of time. But it doesn't say what happens if you make a vow and then you aren't able to keep it. I mean, essentially, without saying it, you don't have that opportunity in the Torah. The Torah doesn't allow us to cancel out our vows, and so that's why the Kol Nidre is a particularly interesting text, because it's not something that we see in our tradition very often. Todd, did you want to say something?
Well, my understanding is that an unmarried woman, her vow can be canceled by her father, right? So, anyway.
Right. Yeah. So just to give you some context, give all of you some context, and we're going to get into it a very, very little bit. And I'm not an expert in this book in this section of the Talmud, but I'm going to show us a few texts and hopefully we can all sort of go through them together. There is an entire Masechet, an entire book called Nedarim, which is all on the study of vows and who can annul vows and who can cancel vows, who can make vows, who can cancel them. And so, Todd, you're bringing up one of those examples. Also, husbands can now annul vows for their wives. It's very, very, very complicated, and we're not going to get too much into it. But if it's something that you're interested in, there's tons and tons of legal texts about what are vows and how they're used in our tradition. Any thoughts before we move into the Talmud a little bit? We're going to do our best here. Okay. So in the Mishnah, we have this Mishnah from Nedarim. Most of the Talmud starts with a Mishnah, and then the Gemara, the Talmud sort of riffs off of that Mishnah, and there's different topics in there. So this Mishnah says, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, even one who wants to take a vow prohibiting another from benefiting from him, but only in order that he should eat with him, not intending to take an actual vow, should say to him at the outset, any vow that I take in the future is void. And this statement is effective, provided that he remembers at the time of the vow that his intent at the beginning of the year was to render it void. Should we read it again? Yeah, everybody's like, what are you talking about? Even one who wants to take a vow prohibiting another from benefiting from him, but only, so just as a reminder, the bolded words are referring to the text, and the non-bolded words are sort of the commentary that Sefaria uses to help us understand and sort of make full sentences. Even one who wants to take a vow prohibiting another from benefiting from him, but only in order that he should eat with him, not intending to take the actual vow, should say to him, any vow that I take in the future is void. So essentially, what this Mishnah I think is saying is that if you say at the time, the vow in the future is void, i.e. I may not actually, there's a saying that sometimes you may hear religious people say, bli neder, right? I'm going to give $10,000 to tzedakah, bli neder, right? Like, that's my intention is to do it, but I'm gonna put this little clause on it so that I may not carry it through, for example, right? So that's what this Mishnah is sort of suggesting, that you can make a vow and kind of give it a caveat that you might not follow through, and then you're not liable for it in the end. So maybe this is kind of a compromise, right? Where we're saying, well, we may not actually follow through with it, and if we don't follow through with it, we haven't actually made the vow to its fullest extent, and so we're not sort of liable for whatever guilt and punishment will come after. Does that make sense? I mean, maybe it makes technical sense, but does it make sense to, like, does that work for you? No, Marcia, you're not liking that. Tell me why.
It seems to me that you're being very flippant. And it seems to me that the nature of a vow is to be serious. And the nature of a vow is intention. And to make a vow and negate it immediately, to me, is deceitful.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Ellen, did you have your hand? No, you're going to say the same thing. Yeah, so, and I think it kind of goes back to our original question, which is, what is a vow? Who are we actually talking to? Now, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you don't actually care if we're talking to God or another person. A vow is a vow, and you should actually carry it out. And here the Mishnah is kind of giving us a little bit of an out for how we use these vows. Now, you have to consider that in certain circumstances, the punishment for breaking a vow or for not following through on a vow is death, right? So in that case, you might understand why the Mishnah and the Gemara sort of give these caveats and give these explanations for how we actually use vows to sort of protect people from getting themselves into a bind, right? I understand where you're coming from. You're saying that this person shouldn't even go there if they're not going to make the vow, though. I would say we should maybe be a little bit kind and understand that people do their best, and sometimes they don't follow. They can't follow through 100%. Yes, Sandra.
Well, I was thinking, in the past, when Jews were supposed to convert to Christianity or death or leave the country, maybe this would apply. They would vow for the new religion. But secretly they would remain Jews.
That's exactly right. So Sandra you skipped us to the very end of the lesson, which is great. That's sort of the punchline. That is the reason why Kol Nidre has stayed in our text, because that was one of its intentions, right? That people were taking vows to other religions for fear of their own lives and safety and whatever was happening in the time. And there was this idea that we had to be able to get out of the vows that we made, because they were made, maybe not with our heart, but with sort of survival, right? With survival in mind. And it's a really good point. So Sandra's sort of playing the other side, which is saying, well, sometimes maybe it's necessary to take a vow that you don't actually want to keep. So thank you for bringing that up. All right. We're going to get a little bit more complicated, and then I think we're going to settle out towards the end here as we get into the Kol Nidre text. So the Gemara comes back and answers this and says, hold on a second in the chat. Yeah, it's a great, Todd, it's a great question, the eat with him part. I think it's just an example of the fact that it's talking about something with another person. I'm not entirely sure why it says it there. So thank you for the question. The Gemara answers, the Mishnah is incomplete and is teaching like this. In the case of one, here we go again. In the case of one who wants to eat with him, and he urges him to do so and makes a vow with regard to him, this vow is included in the category of vows of exhortation. So now we're going to get a little bit into, different categories. right? Where you're really begging somebody to do something, I suppose, which do not require dissolution. And in addition, one who desires that his vows not be upheld for the entire year, this is the important part, one who desires that his vows not be upheld for the entire year should stand up on Rosh Hashanah and say, any vow that I take in the future shall be void. So this is the text, this is the proof text for the Kol Nidre. Now, interestingly, it says that you should do this on Rosh Hashanah, and we know that we actually do it on Yom Kippur. So that has kind of transformed over the different iterations of the prayer and over the different iterations of the Machzor. But this idea that his vows not be upheld for the entire year, he should stand up and he should actually say that, right? And that's what we do on Kol Nidre. And this statement is effective, providing that he remembers at the time of the vow that his intent at the beginning of the year was to render it void. So those of you who said before, I don't like this idea. If you make a promise, you should keep your promise. This Kol Nidre text is probably going to be a little bit problematic, right? Because essentially what you're saying is anything in the next year should be null and void. And this text, this Mishnah, is the source of our text. So any questions up until now? Todd, the eat with him thing we can maybe get back to, but it's a little bit off the, yeah. Any thoughts? Okay, yeah, Ellen.
I can see that you could be exhorted to make a vow that you wouldn't keep. But it seems to me that any vows that come from my heart, I should be obligated to do the best of my ability, which I think is what Marcia is saying too. So I can see two categories, but the part that I am doing on my own volition, I feel like I should be held to unless there are some extenuating circumstances.
Right, and I think you're right, and this doesn't necessarily take into account the extenuating circumstances. It seems to be the way that the text is offering us here is very black and white, right? You either keep it or you don't, and that's why it's sort of problematic in the way that maybe we think about vows today, or think about, we're sort of using the word promise instead of the word vow. You said to the best of my abilities. It doesn't say that in this text, right? It's not giving you sort of the benefit of the doubt that things come up, or, I promise to give this amount of money, but I don't actually have that amount of money at this time, or I promise to, sit and eat with a friend and I actually don't have time to do that, right? It doesn't sort of take into account what Catherine was saying before, this sort of unknown, the uncertainty of life, right? And so the texts are basically warning us, better not to get yourself into the situation of making a vow than to get yourself into a situation where you can't actually follow through with it. Marcia.
The one thing that really haunts me about this is the difference, the juxtaposition between how central Kol Nidre is to Jewish life. People who never go to shul go to Kol Nidre services. How haunting the melody is, how so many people can hum it, how really important it is, and the actual text.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
And I'm wondering why this has so much staying power when so many people, if they actually read the text, because we're not living in the time of the Spanish Inquisition, and we're not being asked to vow to convert to Christianity, but this prayer still has incredible staying power.
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a great question, and we're going to actually see some rabbis who very much believe that it should not be part of our liturgy. And there's not a whole lot of text, unfortunately, supporting why it should be in there. Right? There's many more texts saying why it shouldn't be in there than why it should be. Gary.
I was introduced to a concept this Rosh Hashanah that I had never heard before, and it was from Rambam, and it had to do with teshuvah, where he says teshuvah is not a mitzvah because it can't be a commandment. It must be, it must come from a free person of their own free will. And when thinking of that in the context of this, it gives us permission to enter, to enter Yom Kippur free from our failure to do teshuvah during the year, because if teshuvah is a vow from a person who is free to make that commitment, and we fail in that teshuvah, it gives us the chance to start all over. And looked in that concrete example, it really has a resonance in a way that I never thought of before.
Yeah, and how does that work for you? Does that work?
Yeah, it really does, because, you know, we're going to try to change, and most of us, we will not totally succeed. So it gives us a chance in the new year to look at ourselves again and to try to do better and start from scratch. And it's kind of nice.
Right, we'll do our best, but we know that things happen and people make mistakes. And so we've sort of annulled the vows, set ourselves up for success, if you will. Sandy.
I thought I read somewhere that the Sephardim annul vows that they have taken in the previous year, whereas the Ashkenazim annul them for the future year, and that their custom would seem to go against this particular Gemara.
Yeah, so that's true. The text is slightly different, and actually the original Kol Nidre text was written that way. It was written to annul vows that happened in the past, and then somewhat recently, I mean, in the 11th or 12th century, I mean, obviously it's not recent to today, but not Talmudic times, the text was changed to annulling vows in the future. And so that's a bit how we've sort of rationalized having this text in our liturgy, because of the idea that we're annulling for the future and not for the past. So yeah, thank you for bringing, I can't speak to whether or not the Sephardi still do that, though I know that there are slight differences in certain texts. I mean, even more liberal texts have sort of made this into like a more poetic piece of liturgy than we see it here, which is very technical. Yeah.
But I mean, always annulling the past year always made more sense to me, and I think relates maybe to what Gary just said about starting over. And anyway. So
annulling the past makes more sense. Yeah, I think it makes more sense from I don't know, maybe from a spiritual sense, that you can get behind, well, everything that I've done in the past year, it's annulled, but it doesn't so much reflect the I don't know, the origin of these texts, I guess, is what I would say. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, so we sort of answered this question, right? If we say in advance that our vows are going to be null, what is the point of making them? We have some different thoughts around the room here on what the answer of that is. And this one this touches a little bit on what Gary was saying. It's a little bit more about the heart. And this is from the Shulchan Aruch, which is a codified book of laws. One who states, the vows I wish to vow shall not be vows, and then vows, this is no vow. This is only the case when one expresses the condition verbally, but if one merely thought of this, it is a matter of the heart and cannot cancel the vow that was spoken. There are those who say that even if one whispers such a condition, it is like a matter of the heart. And the Ramah is a sort of commentator on the Shulchan Aruch. As for us, when we say Kol Nidre on the eve of Yom Kippur, it is as if we are making this condition. Nonetheless, we do not rely on this to permit things without asking the rabbis, except for urgent cases. Thoughts? There's something about actually saying this out loud, right? Thinking it or the intention behind it is actually not good enough. You actually have to speak it out loud, which is perhaps, you know, how we get to saying the Kol Nidre. Sandy, did you want to say something? Sandy Edwards?
Excuse me. Yeah, well, the Rama has this, has a different orientation to rabbis from the time when in the community, everybody would turn to the rabbi for decisions, which is not, I mean, people still do, but it's not quite the same relationship.
Sure, yeah, there's definitely an idea that the rabbis, you know, made decisions, but also perhaps in terms of the Kol Nidre, you know, what I often think about this prayer, and we can get into it a little bit when we actually look at the words, we're sort of running short on time, but it's not a prayer that we sing communally, right? Typically it's led by the Shliach Tzibor, the person who's leading the prayer. And so it's written in the collective. It says, our vows not be considered vows, right? So the Shaliach Tzibor is sort of annulling vows for the whole community. I don't know if that's exactly what you were sort of pointing out, but this idea that the rabbis hold a different level of commitment, or that they're making decisions for the community. Yeah.
Well, that as well as we do not rely on this to permit things without asking the rabbis. And so making the vows is communal, and it's done by the rabbi necessarily, but to adjudicate everything.
Right, right.
Is a different role.
Yeah, and I think probably talking about, I mean, it doesn't say it specifically, but probably talking about the religious vows versus the secular vows, that you would want to run that by the rabbi, I suppose, or that it would be up to the rabbi to make that kind of a decision. Yeah, Sadie Goldstein.
I just find this very scary, because if you just merely think of it, and we think of things all the time, and there's not the same kind of level of control that you have, because to actually say something is a very deliberate act, and to think or have something in your heart, it's very frightening.
Yeah, that you can, that God is thinking about your heart and your lips. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Thank you. Anybody else? All right, so I want to, since we're heading towards the end, which feels like the hour flew by, I want to actually look at this text, and then I'll show you all the reasons why we shouldn't be saying it, and then we'll leave. Kol nidre ve'esarei ushvu'ei v'charamei v'karamei v'finuyei. All vows and things we have made forbidden on ourselves, and oaths and items we have consecrated to the temple, and vows issued with the expression konum, and vows which are abbreviated, and vows issued with an expression kanoth. So there's certain words in Hebrew and in Aramaic. This prayer is written in a mix of Hebrew and Aramaic, and there are certain words in there that they're not able really to translate, and so they put the actual word in. You can see in your Machzor on 205 it has a little bit of a different translation, but not much. That we have vowed and sworn and dedicated and made forbidden upon ourselves. From this Yom Kippur until next Yom Kippur, may it come to us at a good time. We regret having made them. May they all be permitted, forgiven, eradicated, and nullified, and may they not be valid or exist any longer. Our vows shall no longer be vowed, and our prohibitions shall no longer be prohibited, and our oaths are no longer oaths. So essentially, we're heading into the year saying that any vows that we make from now until the next year should not be, are annulled, right? Should not be taken as real vows. I like Gary's interpretation, right? That we're sort of given this freedom to make mistakes. But I also understand the other side of the argument, which is, how does that affect, the person that we are and the commitments that we make, if we can just say, oh, well, I didn't really make that vow, or it doesn't really count, right? There's sort of a, I don't know, it takes away a level of seriousness. Now, I guess you could say that it depends on what the vow actually is, right? We might be talking about something very, very serious, or something a little bit more minor. Anyway, any thoughts, having sort of read through the text itself? All right, I'm going to give you all the rabbis here, and I'll apologize ahead of time, because hopefully you're still able to find meaning in this prayer. But I think it's important to hear what people have to say. For many years, Kol Nidre was not part of our liturgy. In fact, the rabbis and scholars argued against it. Here are some examples of the rabbis who argued against it. We do not ascribe to the custom of annulling vows on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. However, we heard that in other countries they say Kol Nidre. We heard that in other countries that they say Kol Nidre. We did not hear about this from our teacher. So they're basically saying, right, we know that it happens elsewhere, but this is not our custom. The tractate Nadarim, which is kind of what we've been looking at today, has not been studied by two Babylonian Yeshivot for over 100 years. We do not ascribe to the custom of reciting Kol Nidre anywhere in Babylonia. We do not announce vows on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. You should be stringent on this and not say it as per the custom in the two yeshivot. So you don't get yourself involved in making vows that are going to be annulled. You just shouldn't make them at all. Apparently, the intention of those few communities who say Kol Nidre is for vows to come, but the language got distorted. However, it should not be said. Best not to say Kol Nidre at all. We do not say it in Catalonia. Now that your congregants have accepted the need to correct the language of Kol Nidre, I believe that they will now listen to you if you tell them to completely omit it. All right, so where are people, how do people feel about it this morning? We're about to head into this week of Tshuva, right? We're in the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we're gonna get to Kol Nidre on Sunday night, and I'm gonna go to the Bima and I'm gonna recite this prayer 3 times on behalf of the community and all of you. Thoughts? It should be there, it shouldn't be there. Ernie.
It wouldn't be Kol Nidre without beginning with that prayer. It is so much part of our DNA almost. It's embedded in the service.
I'm reminded of I was teaching a learner's minyan a couple, 6 or 8 months ago, and we got to the Kaddish, and we were studying the words of the Kaddish, and the Kaddish, the Hatzi Kaddish, the Kaddish Shalem, it's all written in Aramaic. And somebody said, why do we say this in Aramaic? And I thought, because it was written in Aramaic. Well, yeah, but a lot of things were written in different languages, and we've now translated them to Hebrew. And I think the idea, like Ernie, what you're saying is, it's part of our tradition. I mean, we do it this way because we've always done it this way. Now, the interesting piece about Kol Nidre is that it's actually come in and out of our tradition. And right now, it happens to be in, right? And it happens to be something that we do. And I guess what I'm asking, and I appreciate your answer, that it's just so much a part of our service and our tradition at this moment that to take it out would feel strange and would feel empty. And what would we actually call the service, right? If we don't say Kol Nidre, what would we call it? Erev Yom Kippur, maybe, like we do at Erev Rosh Hashanah. But there is this idea that it's in there because it's something that we've always done. And I think this is just sort of a challenge to really think about what it is that we're saying, and what it means to make a promise going into the coming year. Yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually based on the discussion today, I mean, I just really see it, the whole thing as being really reframed as almost an acknowledgement of the sovereignty of God and, our lack of control, but, with the best intention, we're going forward. But, yeah.
Thank you. Raz.
Adonai Melech.
Right.
I agree with Catherine. I think that in a weird way, even though you, as the Chazon Nidr, are saying these words for us, that it's actually reminding us that we have our own responsibilities, and I think it's an important reminder. It's really heavy, I think. And I think people really feel it, even though you are the person that is saying these words. It is in our hearts as we read them also.
Yeah, thank you. Gary.
I really like the idea that if we, which, as I said, I'd never heard or thought of before, that if teshuvah is not a commandment, it's something we voluntarily enter into. I like the idea that we acknowledge each year at Yom Kippur that we'll probably fail in the teshuvah we commit to, and that's okay. We get a clean slate to start again. And I do like that idea that comes from this thing, that I may come into this with the best intentions and make vows to do things, which I'll probably fail with. And I can even, if I come into it openly and fail, that's okay. I have next year to try again.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess for me, I wish that the text would say that, right? I could imagine that, like here, it's a legal formula. It's essentially saying everything in the next year is going to be annulled, and it's annulled and voided and regarded as not valid, and et cetera, et cetera. I think that if there was a line that said, because of our imperfections, it would change the whole sort of feeling of the prayer and make it perhaps a bit less problematic. I don't know that it would change all those angry rabbis' minds, but it would certainly change the intention of the way that I think about, you read this prayer and then you read the text of our tradition, the Torah and the other texts, and you're thinking like, where does this come from? And of course the rabbis have taken it out. But without commentary, I think it's hard to, hard to rationalize it, I guess. But thank you for that. Yeah. Anybody else? I know we're just hitting 9 o'clock. Todd, are you wanting to say something?
Well, I was going to say, I've been studying the Utsana Tokef, and, that's a poem, okay? And around the time of the rabbis all you cited, they very much objected to inserting poems into the prayer before the Kedusha, right? And in other places. So I'm just wondering, and a lot of people these days have problems with the theology of Utsana Tokef, right? But I'd say even more so with the legal formula of Kol Nidre. So it seems like these controversies, the rabbis have been against it for about 1,500 years, right? And it seems like for a variety of reasons, these persist in our culture and expressed in the liturgy.
Right. They come in and out. Yeah, and the rabbis always find something to argue about for sure. We talked about a little bit last week about the Unetaneh Tokef and the sort of theological problems with it. And even so, when we get to it, we say it because it's part of our tradition, and we sort of wrestle with those ideas. And I think this is a similar situation. Catherine, and then I think we will wrap.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, even the rabbis of the Talmud knew that there was no end to adding things to the service and making the services longer and longer and longer and longer.
Yeah, yeah. I want to leave you with one thought just as we close, which is why we say it 3 times. There's a lot of commentary on this. But the Machzor Vitri, which is one of the original Machzorim, the first time the Chazan must utter it very softly, like one who hesitates to enter the palace of a king to ask a gift of God, whom he fears to approach. The second time he may speak somewhat louder, and the third time more loudly still, as one who is accustomed to dwell at court and to approach his sovereign as a friend. So I'll do my best. Next Sunday night, we'll come together virtually to hear this prayer. And there's actually sort of rationale behind the ways that you say it all 3 times. And I had this thought that I won't do it, don't worry, but I had this thought about sort of inserting the Moroccan version as number 2, just to throw people. Could be interesting, right? When I heard it last night, I thought, oh, that would be very, very cool. But anyway, so yeah, the melodies and the melodies really invoke something for people, and I think that that's important. So thank you for studying this with me, just to give us a little bit of a